Biological parameters can be categorized in a few different ways. First off, the life that lives within soil can be both macro and microscopic. Macro, you're probably most familiar with because you can see them so easily. This is like earthworms, little gnats that live in the soil, pill bugs, any life in the soil that you can see, that's macro soil biology. Microscopic life is, of course, microscopic. So we can't see it with the naked eye, but there is still a whole bunch of life in the soil. Biological life in the soil can take on both forms. It can be beneficial or it can be harmful. Beneficial could, again, be, say, the worms increasing porosity and cycling nutrients to make it more available for plants. Beneficial could also be microscopic in that we've got the classic mycorrhizal fungi, which colonizes plant roots and helps them to grow. Harmful things can be insects which eat the roots of plants, because we are talking about the soil, not above the soil. So insects which are in the soil eating the roots. This can also be microscopic, things like symphyllin, which are basically, they look like tiny, tiny centipedes, and they can demolish your plant crop. It is worth examining what mycorrhizal fungi looks like in a plant. So if we have a plant, soil horizon, the plant's on top, and it has roots below. Within a 3D space, these roots can only reach so far. Mycorrhizal fungi can colonize within the root, form some nodules, and then the fungi themselves send out a bunch of filaments. And even though these filaments are ostensibly to feed the fungi, what's happening is that the plant is benefiting. There is an exchange happening here. It's a symbiotic relationship. Microbial life in the soil is similar to the microbial life within you and I. It facilitates our digestive tract by breaking down things that we could not access and making it available for our nutrition. So the calories that you and I eat, 60% of them go to feed our microgut biome, or our gut microbiome. And the rest of it is actually calories for us, which are usually passed on to us from the bacteria themselves. Similar thing is happening in the soil. As microbes are living in the soil, they're weathering soil particles, they're breaking down rocks, and they're leaching nutrients, often through the form of their own excrement. And this can be now taken up by a root. Like a root can grow out and absorb these nutrients. A root cannot absorb anything from a rock itself. It needs it to be mineralized. And we'll talk about the mineralization cycle at another time. Soil microbial life plays a significant part in the role of chemical mineralization. That is, taking something from an organic form, something that used to be living, and dissolving it really down into its component parts so that the individual molecules, the individual chemicals can be taken up by a plant root. So it's kind of like you and I don't digest a potato, right? We're actually digesting the sugars that came from an enzyme which broke apart the carb that we got because our teeth mashed the potato down into this starch. And so you see, we're not eating the potato. Several steps away, we're eating what the potato was made of. And the same thing is happening in the soil. Plants can't eat rocks. They're eating weathered, decayed, kind of like soupy remains of rocks. And to that end, we have something called the brown web. You may have heard of the green web. It's a classic biological life cycle, like you have a plant. It gets eaten by, some animal, which itself is eaten by some other animal. And that's your green web, starting from the plant's green, and the sun's energy has moved its way up the cycle. But this isn't complete. It's not a full cycle, right? There is a brown web full of decomposers and detritivores. These are things which eat detritus, decomposed material. They are eating when this plant dies and it just makes a bunch of leaf litter. worms are coming up, grabbing the leaf, and pulling it underground and eating it and pooping it out. When this cow dies and leaves its skeleton, all of its guts have been absorbed into the material, into the soil below, and eventually through enough weathering, the climate, decaying these bones, we get again incorporation into the soil. Even ourselves, when we die, we become part of the soil again. And so this is the brown web. Like, our energy does ultimately come from the sun, but it doesn't just stay inside living material. It becomes detritus. It becomes decomposing matter. It becomes soil. To that end, we're going to watch a clip from this video because it looks better than me scratching on the whiteboard all the time.
In real-life terrestrial ecosystems, less than 10% of plant matter is eaten while it's still alive. What about the other 90? Well, just look at the ground on an autumn day. Living plants shed dead body parts, fallen leaves, broken branches, and even underground roots. Many plants are lucky enough to go their whole lives without being eaten, eventually dying and leaving remains. All of these uneaten, undigested, and dead plant parts, that 90% of terrestrial plant matter, that becomes detritus, the base of what we call the brown food chain, which looks more like this. What happens to plants also happens to all other organisms up the food chain. Some are eaten alive, but most are eaten only when they're dead and rotting. And all along this food chain, living things shed organic matter and expel digestive waste before dying and leaving their remains to decay. What a food chain really represents is a single pathway of energy flow. And within any ecosystem, many of these flows are linked together to form a rich network of interactions, or food web, with dead matter supporting that network at every step. The resulting food web is so connected that almost every species is no more than 2 degrees from detritus, even us humans. You probably don't eat rotting things, poop, or pond scum directly, but your food sources probably do.
And with that covering of the brown web, we're finished with our very brief look at the biological parameters of soil.